Unreal Blueprints, direct actor communication. So let's review what we know so far. We know that actors have an event graph. We know when we create a blueprint, we're creating a subclass of that actor. And we know that within the event graph can be events we can listen to, overlap, on hit, things like that. We know events are in red. Blueprints is a visual scripting language. And we know we can react to these various different events. And we know in a previous video we've looked at custom events, and this is a way to pass data within a graph. So we use events and function nodes. We define the endpoint first for the event, then we call a function that calls that event, triggering that event within the same graph. Now, an interesting side effect of the custom events within a particular graph is that these custom events are public. So similar to how we used functions that were also public, or we used instance editable to create public variables, custom events are also public. So I mentioned this as an interesting side effect because Unreal, in fact, calls this a very special name. This is direct communication. So this is a particular pattern where a custom event in one blueprint is called from another blueprint. As long as we have a reference to the original actor or the original blueprint, we can then call that custom event because it's public. Unreal calls this direct communication because we are literally passing data directly from one graph to another, one-to-one. So let's look at kind of an example of doing this. So I'm going to return to the example made for custom events, and we're going to translate it from using custom events within the same graph to using direct communication between multiple blueprints, or two blueprints in this case. So let's move over to Unreal and the previous custom events example. So we had within the custom events video right here a setup where we had a cube that had its input enabled, and when we pressed M, it translated hey directly over to this, directly over to that. And we can just see it one more time in action. Press play. When I press M, hey. So this is all well and good and a good demonstration of custom events, but we don't necessarily want to split up our input across a bunch of different actors because that becomes kind of a huge deal to go in and change or go in and update or just maintain. Generally, anything having to do with input or a particular movement or things like that should generally be in the same place. And for us, we just want it in one single blueprint. So what we're going to do then is I'm going to create a separate blueprint that's going to serve as kind of the input core of everything. I'm going to leave the custom event that's in the cube, and then I'm going to call the custom event from another blueprint and another graph entirely, pass the data in, and it's going to produce the same result. So the end result will be exactly the same, but the steps in between will be a little bit different. So over here, player start, I'm going to make this a blueprint. So a new subclass. Okay. All right. So I've just gone through that steps right here. So this is over here, a completely different blueprint, but this is where I want the input to be. I don't want the input spread out across a bunch of different actors because that's potentially very confusing. So over here though, I've already got this custom event press M going on, but I've got all these other things too. So what I want to do then is I'm going to just delete all of this stuff, and I'll just move this back over here. Select all of this, move this up. So this is ultimately what I want to happen. I want press M to occur somewhere, and then I want to print something to a string, or print a string to the screen. So I'll go ahead and save this. So over here in a completely different blueprint, in its event graph, let's set this up all over again. So let's enable an input. And then where is that input coming from? Well, it's coming from player controller. What is player controller? Let's get player controller right here. And that's set up. Okay. So now we can react to different events. So let's go ahead and do this again. Keyboard M right here. Okay. So when I press this key, I want it to call the event in the other blueprint. So to do that, I need a reference to where that blueprint is because it's custom. It's new. It's not based on any existing abstract or classes built within Unreal. It's certain it is something that is custom. Okay. So in which case, I probably want a variable. This variable will hold an actor reference to the other blueprint, and then I can reference it from there. So because the other blueprint is a subclass, that makes it a class, which means it's a type of data I can hold, right? So let's do this kind of a weird way. So I'm going to create a new variable, and this will be cube reference. Okay, and it defaults to a Boolean, which we don't want. So coming over here in details, let's change its variable type to something else. So there's something else I want then is object types. And I could scroll through all of this list right here, but I actually know what it's called. It's called cube_blueprint. So what if we searched for it? And oh look, there it is right there, cube blueprint. But this already exists within the space, so I want a reference to it right here. And there we go. Now we have a variable that will contain in the future cube blueprint. But in order to set this value, I need to change it in the Unreal editor. So in order to do that, I need to make this public. So instance editable, enabled. Compile, save. Okay, let's move back to Unreal for just a moment, the Unreal editor anyway. Now, let's click on player start. Down here, cube reference. I'm going to use the dropper this time. Click the dropper, click the cube, and we've got cube blueprint for the value. Okay, fine. Let's move back to the blueprint right here. And I can drag and drop this out here. And I want to get it. Okay, so whatever's stored within cube reference, which we know is a reference to the cube blueprint, we can then access anything that's public from this. And one of the things that's public is custom events. So if I start typing call, it says, oh, do you mean to call the function press M? And I do. Okay, then I'm going to connect the execution pins from this to this. And let's change this to that. So what have I done here? Well, this input, I'll go ahead and compile and save. This input is happening in a completely different graph. It's happening over here in player start. And it's got its enabled input, and it's getting player controller from index 0, which is the default. So when we press M on the keyboard, it will then call press M on a completely different graph using this reference down here and pass it the string hey. Over here, it's going to listen for the press M event. Based on whatever it gets, it's going to pass as output to something else, in this case, print string. So over here, we're going to press M. It's going to send hey over here, and then finally to print string. So the end result will look the same as using a custom event within a single graph. But in this case, I'm communicating across blueprints using a one-to-one direct communication method. So I'm directly passing data using custom events. So let's see this finally in action. I'm going to click play, give it focus, press M, and we see hey. The end result is the same that what we saw in custom events, but the data is now being transferred across blueprints from one graph to the other using custom events. So custom events allows us to transfer information within a graph. However, we can call those events from other actors, creating a one-to-one direct communication pattern, and pass data directly to that other blueprint to do something with it. So in this case, we pass the string hey from player start directly to cube blueprint. Cube blueprint then showed it on the screen. So this is a very powerful approach when we want to create a one-to-one connection between different blueprints. We can create a custom event on the receiving end, call it on the other end with a reference to that blueprint, and then pass it data directly. Again, as we showed with the custom events video, this is very, very useful to pass data within a graph, and now even more useful to pass data across graphs itself, or we can pass it from one actor to another actor using the direct communication pattern, creating a one-to-one communication by calling the custom event of another actor in one graph to another.